Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. An ordinary house in a quiet suburb hides an unusual story. This is Andrew and Melissa's home, but it's not a cozy harbor. A thin layer of dust had settled on the front door, and the owners had long since taken to entering and exiting through the garage's side door or the patio's sliding glass door. To the right was a meticulous, formal living room, a display room that was carefully furnished but never used, making it the coldest part of the house. A hallway to the left leads to 3 bedrooms, including a spacious master suite and a bathroom that occasionally hosts visitors. That ordinary morning, Andrew sat alone in his wingback chair in the living room, the back of the chair facing the arched doorway. It was his habit, whenever Melissa was out, to brood here, weighing the cost of ending the unhappy marriage. He knew that once that step was taken, mutual friends would take sides, and the house that held the memories would cease to exist. He would face years of alimony, and his life's accumulated wealth would evaporate in half in a heartbeat, not to mention those suffocatingly high legal fees. What gives him the biggest headache is that even after the separation, he still has to continue dealing with Melissa, the narrow-minded, vindictive woman. Just as Andrew was lost in these unpleasant thoughts, there was a slight rattling at the side door. He knew it was Melissa returning from her grocery shopping. By all rights, he should have gotten up immediately and acted as if he had been in the bedroom. She found him in the living room, and there was bound to be another interminable argument. Arguments have long been an everyday occurrence in this household. Every argument is started by Melissa, who is capable of making unfounded accusations against Andrew for the most trivial of faults, for unfounded reasons, and even for no reason at all. Andrew understands what she's doing this for, either to keep him on edge or simply for fun. She was good at perpetuating an argument for weeks at a time, and Andrew always found ways to calm her down and try to smooth things over. In Andrew's opinion, life is too short to be consumed by these never-ending frictions. He always believed that it was wise to resolve disputes in a timely manner. The problem, however, is that it doesn't take long for the wind to calm down before Melissa makes waves all over again. The cycle continues for a full decade, and Andrew sees no way out unless death or divorce can bring it all to a close. Nonetheless, Andrew persists in trying to improve the status quo. Only now, he was doing it more to preserve his faltering sanity than to make his wife feel comfortable. For him, this endeavor is like groping in the dark, with neither hope nor direction in sight. The sound of the refrigerator door closing was extraordinarily clear in the silent room, and Andrew knew that Melissa had already placed the frozen food in place. In a few minutes, she would call him out to carry the rest of the groceries in a commanding tone, as she always did. It's her usual shtick, giving orders, and Andrew not only has to obey them unconditionally, but he has to put up with her endless nitpicking as he carries out his duties. "No, I want you to put the cereal in the other cupboard," she always said, as if she were taming a disobedient pet. To avoid such breathtaking moments, Andrew chooses to remain still. He waited with bated breath for her call, or worse, that piercing whistle. That voice always made him feel deeply humiliated, like treating an obedient dog. Surprisingly, however, he heard neither Melissa's call nor the obnoxious whistling. In its place was a light set of footsteps approaching the entrance. Andrew's heartbeat suddenly sped up and his body tensed instinctively. If he turned his head at the moment, he would see Melissa standing in the tiled entryway, cautiously peering down the hallway like a thief, making sure no one was around. Andrew's heart was beating violently in his chest, unease and curiosity intertwining into a jumbled mess within him. He waited in silence, not knowing what he would hear next or how he should react. The air seemed to freeze, and an indescribable tension pervaded. It's like the calm before the storm, signaling that something big enough to change everything is about to happen. "I should have called right there in the car," Melissa mentally remorsed. "But it's just too risky to drive and talk on the phone at the same time. Never mind, it's safe now." And that fool Andrew must be working like a good husband at the gazebo in the backyard. A few seconds later, Andrew heard the beep of a cell phone button. Melissa was in the entryway at that moment, just 5 feet from the back of the chair he was sitting in, close enough to hear her breathing, but far enough away to seem like she was in 2 worlds. "Hi, honey. Is it easy for you to talk now?" Melissa whispered, with a sweetness in her voice that Andrew had never heard before. The epithet was like a sharp dagger that went straight to Andrew's heart. In 10 years, she had never spoken to him in such a tone. He felt a wave of vertigo, but had to continue to keep his composure. Thursday afternoon is fine. I'll call him after 1 p.m. He would have been back in the office from lunch by then. If he's in his seat, we've got a couple hours. I'll open the back door as usual and meet you about 2 o'clock. Melissa paused for a moment, as if listening to the other man. Then she replied in a sickeningly coquettish voice, "Of course, dear. You can put that anywhere you like. You know how much I love your big guy. I've got to go, to see where my little boy is. See you Thursday." The sound of the phone closing was like thunder in Andrew's ears. He heard Melissa's footsteps fading away toward the sliding glass doors of the patio. She whistled harshly in the direction of the gazebo and called out Andrew's name. Apparently, she hadn't noticed his sharp intake of breath or heard the rumble of blood rushing through his head. Everything became clear. He finally realized why Melissa was always picking on him, why she was deliberately trying to degrade his self-esteem. It's not just a marital tragedy, it's an elaborate deception. And now, at last, he had caught the tail end of the truth. This is not the first time Andrew has faced such a stressful situation. His military career and life experience had allowed him to develop a set of mechanisms for dealing with crises. Never act rashly unless he was directly attacked. Use the information at his disposal to gain an advantage and choose the timing of the encounter autonomously. And keep his expression calm and control the rhythm of his breathing to maintain apparent equanimity. Andrew stood up and walked into the study with a steady gait. "I'm here," he said, not a waver in his voice. "I was just in the restroom. I have to go to the hardware store to get some parts for the gazebo." He walked through the den toward the kitchen and the side door, deliberately avoiding meeting Melissa's gaze. At the moment, he was even surprised at his own composure, and even more surprised that he was able to restrain the urge to grab her by the throat. As he passed Melissa, she turned and said in that condescending tone, "You need to wear a hat out there. You look really sunburned. I don't want to see your skin peeling in the next few days. By the way, there are still groceries to be moved in, so bring them in before you go anywhere. Don't be gone too long. I don't want to not see you all day." She casually tossed her cell phone into her purse, which sat on the kitchen counter, and walked with a graceful stride toward the back door, ready to check on Andrew's progress on the gazebo. No doubt she'll be all over him again when he returns. This is Melissa, who says everything to Andrew as if she's giving orders, with explicit and implicit put-downs hidden between every word. Andrew followed Melissa's instructions and mechanically carried the groceries into the house and put them away. Then he left the house in the beat-up little pickup truck. But instead of heading to the hardware store, he parked his car in a small, secluded park a few blocks from his home. For the next 15 minutes, Andrew repeatedly recalled the conversation he had overheard. He tried to engrave every word in his mind, analyzing every detail as carefully as a codebreaker. To make sure he doesn't miss any clues, he even meticulously records key information in a notebook he carries with him. There is no doubt that his wife is cheating on him. What's even more shocking is that she chose to carry out this betrayal in their shared home, most likely in their marital bed. An intense anger churned through Andrew, but he forced himself to keep his wits about him. He suddenly realizes that he's worked hard all these years to support his family, and Melissa has used the opportunity to stab him in the back. But who is the man she calls darling? The question stuck in Andrew's heart like a thorn. Now he began to think about some more practical issues, trying to determine the best course of action. Melissa says she'll let her lover in through the back door on Thursday, which means the man will be walking through the alley. Maybe he could set up an ambush there. But if he did, what would he do with his perfidious wife? If a lover drives up, his car must be parked nearby. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Andrew's mind. The man would probably park in this park. The thought made his heart beat faster. But who the hell is this man? How was he supposed to find out? There was no more direct way to do that than to call the number he'd seen on Melissa's cell phone. Maybe he could get someone to pretend to have a wrong number and try to find out who the other person was. A female caller might seem less suspicious, but the question was, who could he call for this favor? The answer quickly comes to mind. Melissa's best friend Susan. If even Susan doesn't know about this, then others are probably in the dark as well. Maybe Melissa's sisters know something, but that's unlikely. She and Melissa haven't been close since she was alienated from her family over a messy divorce. Andrew is in deep thought. Should he ask Susan for help? He's known Susan as long as he's known Melissa, and Susan has always been a trusted friend. But he also knows that friendships between women are sometimes more unbreakable than their loyalty to their spouses. On second thought, Susan is married and her husband Nick is 15 years older than her. Of all the couples Andrew knew, they were the most enviable. On a hunch, he guessed that Susan would tell Nick almost anything. But will she tell Nick Melissa's secret too? Although Andrew considers Nick a friend, they are not particularly close. However, Nick is a decent guy, and Andrew is sure that if Nick knew about something like this, he would have told him. After much deliberation, Andrew decides to try Nick first. That meant he needed to make a trip to the golf course. Nick is in semi-retirement and volunteers there every Saturday in a kind of ambassador of goodwill role in exchange for free court use on weekdays. On the drive to the golf course, Andrew carefully framed how to open this sensitive topic. He can't just blurt out the truth in case the news gets back to Susan's ears and is relayed to Melissa. The consequences would be unimaginable. He must proceed with caution, like a seasoned chess player, making every move. Nick was on his way to check out the 7th hole when Andrew arrived at the course. Andrew joined him for the ride in the old golf cart. While traveling, Andrew took a deep breath and spoke carefully. "Nick, I have a hypothetical question for you." Nick glanced at Andrew and continued to concentrate on driving the ball cart. Andrew went on to say, "If you had a confidential conversation with someone, would you feel obligated to keep it a secret, or would you share it with Susan?" Nick suddenly stops the ball cart and turns to look directly at Andrew, his demeanor becoming unusually serious. "Are you asking me to keep a secret from Susan?" There was a hint of caution in his tone. Andrew hastened to explain, "No, it's nothing like that. I was just wondering if you and Susan always share things you hear from others, even in confidence." Nick parked the cart in a patch of grass and turned fully to Andrew, both anticipation and concern in his gaze. "Andrew, if you have a specific question to ask, just say so. I'll do what I can to help." Andrew hesitated, then asked, "If I ask you a question, can you promise to keep this conversation confidential?" Nick replied seriously, "I can assure you that I would never initiate this conversation. However, if Susan asks me directly, I will not lie to her. That's the way I operate. Andrew, I can keep a secret, but I won't lie to my wife or my friends." From the look on Nick's face and the tone of his voice, Andrew got the feeling that he must know something and seemed to have been waiting for this chance to confide in him. Andrew took a deep breath and tried to calm his agitated emotions before asking bluntly, "Nick, do you know if my wife is having an affair?" The air seemed to freeze as soon as the question was uttered. Nick was silent for a long time, as if weighing how to answer. Finally, he spoke slowly, factually, "I can't say I knew she was having an affair." Seeing Andrew's confused expression, Nick sighed and continued, "Let me put it another way. You asked me if I knew if Melissa was or is having an affair, and the answer is yes." Nick's words hit Andrew like a hammer, hitting him hard in the heart. Despite his premonition, the confirmation of the truth still sent a sharp pain through him. His fingers unconsciously gripped the edge of the seat, his knuckles whitening with the effort. Nick went on to tell of the night that changed everything. It was at a party at Holden's house on New Year's Eve last year. Everyone had flocked outside to watch the fireworks, and the house was nearly empty. Susan went upstairs to the bathroom alone because her champagne wasn't working well. It was there that she heard someone trying to turn the doorknob. By the time she was cleaned up and ready to leave, there were some unusual noises coming from the end of the hallway. Nick's voice was low and heavy. Susan was worried that someone might be unwell and walked over to check. At the end of the corridor, she saw a shocking sight. Melissa was pinned against the wall by a tall man, her legs wrapped around the man's waist. When Melissa noticed Susan's presence, she just smiled contemptuously and waved her away as if it were perfectly normal. Andrew felt a wave of vertigo as his fists clenched, his nails sinking deep into his palms. Nick noticed his reaction and gently patted him on the shoulder, his tone apologetic. "I'm sorry, man. Susan told me about it on the way home. You know, she and Melissa have been close friends for years. She wanted to talk to Melissa before we took any action. I insisted that you should be told immediately, But in the end, Susan chose to talk to Melissa alone. Melissa told Susan that it was just a spur-of-the-moment situation caused by alcohol and a fight with you. The man's name was Buddy White, and he was said to be aggressive. Susan asked me to keep it a secret because neither of us wanted to ruin your marriage over a single isolated incident. But I told her in no uncertain terms that if you asked me directly, I wouldn't lie to you. This incident has tormented me for the past 5 months. I'm grateful to have finally spoken up, but I also feel very sorry for you, Andrew. A wave of nausea hit Andrew as he tried to control his churning emotions. Nick, Melissa lied to Susan. This whole thing isn't over. She's continuing her relationship with this person, or possibly someone else. I heard her in person this morning on the phone dating someone. Shock and anger flashed across Nick's face. Jesus, Andrew, if I'd known things were still going on, I would have told you. What do we do now? Andrew took a deep breath, his voice unusually calm. There's one thing maybe you can help me with. I checked Melissa's cell phone and I have the number where she called. Can you have Susan make that call? Pretend it's a wrong number and try to find out who the person is. I want to confirm exactly who she's dating right now. Nick nodded solemnly in agreement. In that moment, there was a certain understanding between the two men. Together, they formulate a plan to reveal more of the truth. Andrew knew that the next few days would be an uphill battle, but at least now he wasn't alone. Later that day, Susan worked up the courage to dial the number. She took a deep breath and enabled her perfect British accent, one that always impressed. Hello, is this Mr. White? Susan asked in her most elegant voice. A low male voice came on the other end of the line. Yes, this is Buddy White. Susan blinked, not expecting it to go so well. Oh, I'm very sorry, wrong number, she said politely and quickly hung up. While the call was unsatisfyingly brief, the message was clear. Melissa really isn't done with Buddy White. The discovery weighed like a heavy stone on everyone's heart. When Susan, Nick, and Andrew get together to discuss this new revelation, Andrew has pain and anger written all over his face. What am I going to do? Andrew's voice was filled with suppressed anger and frustration. I can't just sit back and do nothing. Nick pondered for a moment and cautiously asked, Andrew, do you have any plans in mind? Andrew's eyes became firm and sharp, like a sheathed sword. I intend to catch them at their next meeting. Based on the conversations I've heard, it should be this Thursday. But I need more evidence and want to have as many facts as possible when questioning her so I can completely expose all her lies. Susan frowned and made the suggestion. Can't we hire a private investigator to follow her? Andrew shook his head, a flicker of helplessness in his gaze. I don't know who to call, and it's too tight. Besides, I figure there will be a lot of expenses with the divorce lawsuit, and I need to save my pennies. I need a quick and efficient way to get evidence. The room lapsed into silence as everyone pondered possible solutions. Suddenly, Susan's eyes lit up as if she had caught some inspiration. What if there was a mole? She said excitedly. Nick and Andrew looked at each other in confusion. What do you mean? Nick asked. Susan explains, suppose there's a friend, say her best friend, from whom to extract the story. I could make up a sympathetic story and get her to open up to me. There was a gleam of wisdom in her eyes. Andrew and Nick exchanged a surprised look. The idea does sound promising, like a ray of light in the darkness. For the next hour, they orchestrated the whole thing. Susan will call Melissa and tell her she needs help urgently. They agreed to meet for coffee on Sunday morning. Nick, on the other hand, would modify one of Susan's old handbags and install a miniature video camera inside to record every word and every expression. The plan, though simple, cleverly exploits Melissa's vanity. Once the plan was in place, Susan picked up her cell phone and dialed Melissa's number. Her voice was full of anxiety and urgency. Melissa, I need to talk to you as soon as possible. Can you meet me tomorrow morning for a cup of coffee? I'm in a bit of a situation, and you're the only one with the experience to help me. I trust you. Melissa on the other end of the line immediately showed concern. What's wrong, Susan? Are you okay? Is Nick okay? There was a hint of curiosity in her voice. No, it's not like that. Susan responded quickly, with just the right amount of hesitation in her tone. Melissa, remember the party last New Year's? I'm in a similar situation right now. Ah, I see. Melissa's voice suddenly became excited, as if she had caught on to something interesting. I might be able to help. How about tomorrow morning at 10 at the new coffee shop at the mall? Find a quiet place to talk. After hanging up, Susan turned to Andrew and Nick with a complex expression on her face. Well, the engagement worked. We'll know more tomorrow. Andrew nodded, determination shining in his eyes. Thank you guys. Really. I know this isn't easy for you guys either. Nick patted Andrew on the shoulder, his tone firm. Dude, we're friends. No matter what happens, we've got your back. Later that night, Andrew returned home and forced himself to stay calm. Looking at Melissa, who was busy in the kitchen, he felt a sense of detachment he had never felt before. The once familiar figure now looked so strange, like a well-disguised stranger. He didn't know what the rest of the day would bring, but he knew that no matter what happened, the truth would eventually come out. And he, for one, was ready for the storm. Early Sunday morning, the sun gently pours down on the outdoor seating of the coffee shop. Susan arrived earlier than agreed and discreetly chose a secluded corner. She carefully adjusted the handbag containing the camera to make sure the camera angle was just right. Only Melissa would be in the frame. She ran a few audio tests and was thankful that it was a sunny and windless day and that there wouldn't be too much noise to interfere with the recording. Susan's heart beat faster with each passing second. She knew that the ensuing conversation would change the course of many lives, and the realization sent a heavy pang through her. Just then, she saw Melissa gracefully walk into the coffee shop. "Melissa, I'm here," Susan shouted, while quietly pressing the record button, as if starting an invisible countdown. Melissa walked out with 2 cups of coffee and a confident smile on her face. "Hey, honey," she said. "Got you your favorite latte?" The tiny gesture seemed to flaunt her knowledge and thoughtfulness of her friend. "Thanks," Susan said, deliberately making her voice sound both nervous and excited. "I really need to talk to you." Melissa sat down gracefully with a curious gleam in her eye. "Well, tell me, is it about that New Year's Eve party?" There was a hint of anticipation in her tone, as if she was waiting for some interesting story. Susan nodded and began to tell her carefully prepared story. "Yes, Melissa. There was a man, and he wanted me. I didn't know what to do. He's so charming, and Nick hasn't made out with me in a long time. Nick trusts me completely, and I've never cheated on him, but I'm really turned on right now." She paused, pretending to organize her words. "I wanted to ask you how you felt after the New Year's Eve party. Would I regret it if I did?" Melissa's eyes suddenly lit up, and she leaned forward as if she was about to share a precious secret. "Go for it. Honestly, I don't understand why you haven't done it by now. Nick is a good man, but honey, he's old. You're still young and beautiful. There's no need to waste your time on him." Her tone was full of scorn and petulance. Susan looked at Melissa in surprise, shocked inwardly at her best friend's depravity, even though it was exactly the reaction she was expecting. "Wow, it sounds like you've had a lot of experience with this. Wasn't that party really a one-time thing?" Melissa smiled. It was a smile of superiority. "Honey, since you're joining in now, I'll be honest. That party was definitely not the first, nor the last. As a matter of fact, Buddy and I have had a relationship that has lasted until now." Susan feigned surprise, but inwardly felt a wave of nausea at the blunt admission. "Really? Tell me all the details. This is so exciting. How did you get started? Are you and Buddy still together?" Over the next few minutes, Melissa began to talk at length about her adventures. She describes how she met Buddy at a Halloween party, how she had a secret date in a stairwell, and the countless rendezvous that followed. Her tone was full of smugness, as if she were showing off an enviable treasure. "You know, Sue," Melissa said as she leaned closer, an uncomfortable intimacy in her voice. "To me, Andrew is just a husband. You can't treat a husband like a lover. They serve completely different purposes. Andrew's there to do what I want him to do, and Buddy's there for the good sex. I'm not saying I never enjoy sex with Andrew. In fact, I even kind of look forward to having cooler sex with Andrew after a good time with Buddy." Susan tried to control her expression to keep the shock and disgust from showing. She realized that the woman in front of her had been completely immersed in the lies and betrayal she had woven, and had long since lost her moral compass. "What about Andrew?" she asked cautiously, Aren't you worried he'll find out? Melissa laughed contemptuously, giving an almost cruel expression. Andrew, he's like an obedient puppy. I can do whatever I want with him, and he always comes back obediently. He gets some free sex once in a while, and I get all the freedom. I could go wherever I wanted, but he had to report every move he made to me beforehand. I always knew where he was, so there was never any worry that he would bump into me with my lover. As the conversation continues, Melissa becomes more and more licentious, as if opening Pandora's box. She begins to reveal more shocking details. The other lovers, how they manipulate Andrew, and how she enjoys the thrill of this double life. When Susan concocts a story about her potential lover, Rod, Melissa is completely convinced and enthusiastically encourages her to take action as if she were recruiting an accomplice. By the end of the conversation, Susan felt both disgusted and angry. The woman she had once considered a dear friend had now become so strange and frightening in her eyes. She said a hasty goodbye to Melissa, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Upon returning home, Susan immediately contacted Andrew and Nick. As they watched the video together, a heavy atmosphere filled the room. Andrew has pain and anger written all over his face, while Nick and Susan feel shock and betrayal. The Melissa they knew, the woman who had once been gentle and kind, now appeared to be nothing more than a carefully woven illusion. I never thought Melissa would turn out like this, Susan said softly, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, Andrew. There was guilt in her voice. Andrew was silent for a long time, as if digesting it all. Then he lifted his head with a determined gleam in his eyes. Thank you for helping me uncover the truth. Now, I know what to do. Over the next few days, Andrew's insides churned like the sea in a storm. He thought back over and over again to every word Melissa had said in the video, and with each thought, the anger in his heart grew stronger. However, as a man accustomed to planning and strategizing, he knew not to let his emotions dictate his actions. Andrew sat in his office on Tuesday morning, papers piling up on his desk, but his thoughts were far away. He began to carefully plan his actions for Thursday. There were so many variables to consider, and he knew full well that even the best-laid plans could slip up. After much deliberation, he listed several possible scenarios and the corresponding response options. At lunchtime, Andrew went to the company gym. He spent hours working out to improve flexibility and strength. With every swing, with every lift of the weights, he was visualizing the challenge to come. These trainings not only strengthened his body, but also his heart. When I got home, there was an unusual sense of tension in the air. Communication between Andrew and Melissa is limited to necessary conversation, like a silent game. Normally, Melissa would be all over Andrew, but this time she seemed to sense something was wrong as well. Andrew's behavior was so counterintuitive that it confused her, and she needed to figure out what was going on and get back in control. On Tuesday night, while Melissa was in the shower, Andrew silently rummaged through his drawers, looking for that special gift his grandfather had left him. When he joined the army, these were the parting words given to him by his grandfather. Finally, in a pile of old stuff, Andrew found the pair of brass thumbtacks. The fact that it's made of steel may not be very legal. His grandfather had solemnly told him to use it carefully, saying it might come in handy someday. Now Andrew held this cold weapon in his hand and felt that day had finally come. It's no longer a fair fight. Melissa and her lover play the betrayal game, and he's not about to play by the book. 10 years of deception and humiliation will finally be liquidated at this moment. Thursday came and Andrew forced himself to eat a hearty breakfast. He knew he wouldn't eat lunch, but hoped Melissa's lover would. It'll slow down that guy's reaction time and create an advantage for him. Andrew paced back and forth in his office, constantly reviewing the details of the plan. He'd already prepared some of the necessary items in the guest room, but whether he could use them depended on whether Melissa waited for her lover in the backyard or just opened the back door and went back inside. In any case, he can improvise. Andrew fiddled with the finger tiger sitting on the table and continued to refine his plan. By 1 p.m., he had changed into a pair of sturdy jeans, a snug-fitting t-shirt, and a pair of running shoes that were easy to move in. He double-checked the contents of his pockets: cell phone, keys, thumbtacks, wallet, everything. Before he leaves, Andrew makes a point of calling Melissa on the office landline so she can confirm that he is indeed at work by using the caller ID. He deliberately kept his tone calm and unthreatening. He told Melissa that he had an important meeting in the afternoon and that he might not be able to answer his phone and that his cell phone would be turned off. He said he might be home an hour or so late. The call seemed to reassure Melissa that Andrew was returning to his usual submissive self. She begins to prepare for the upcoming rendezvous, completely unaware of the impending storm. Andrew arrived at the park in a car with Buddy White's wife, Anita. Buddy's car hasn't shown up yet. Anita puts Andrew down and leaves, exiting quietly like a silent co-conspirator. Andrew carefully crossed the street and slipped into his backyard, hiding behind a thick bush and waiting anxiously, checking the time on his cell phone from time to time. At 1:45, Melissa appeared in the backyard, wearing a sexy bikini. She walked briskly to the back door, unlocked it skillfully, and peered down the alley. Seemingly seeing nothing, she closed the door and walked gracefully to the lounge chair under the large tree. The familiar scene sent a wave of nausea through Andrew, but it was the sign he was waiting for. He gently slipped inside through the side door, his heart racing but still trying to remain calm. He went back to the guest room, grabbed the video camera, put on his right thumbtack, and then waited patiently. Too many variables could go wrong. He might have forgotten some detail. Melissa might have opened the back door early, or her lover might have arrived early. But fortunately, everything is going according to plan. Andrew took a few deep breaths and adjusted his mind. The battle will be fought on his terms, with him controlling the pace. Now, he just had to wait for the final moment of offense to arrive. There was an indescribable tension in the air, as if it were the calm before the storm. Andrew stood behind the slightly open door of the guest room, wearing the cold pair of finger tigers in his right hand and clutching the camera in his left. While the quality of the video shot in the dimly lit hallway might not be perfect, he was sure the audio would be clear, enough to record the final testimony of this betrayal. The sound of sliding glass doors moving broke the silence, followed by ambiguous talk and laughter echoing down the hallway. Melissa giggled, like a teenager, and a male voice responded in a low, possessive voice. As they passed the guest room, Andrew could clearly hear the sound of clothing rubbing together and imagined the tall man fondling the wife that was supposed to be his. They went into the master bedroom and indulged in kissing and caressing, not even bothering to close the door. This reckless attitude added to Andrew's anger, but he remained calm. He quietly followed, kneeling in the doorway and peering in. Buddy had taken Melissa in his arms and Melissa, eyes closed, was expertly unbuttoning his shirt as if she'd done it a million times before. Carefully, Andrew placed the camera on the dresser just inside the door. From the screen, he could clearly see that the camera was facing the bed, perfectly capturing the duo who were collapsing on it. This is the toughest time to wait. Andrew needs to make sure that the actual betrayal is videotaped without giving any chance of denial. He retreated back to the door and stood up straight, readying himself for the upcoming challenge. He tried to control the number of times he peeked, not wanting to startle the snake too soon. For 5 whole minutes, the lovers were entwined in bed, both now naked. They were in no hurry to act because they thought they had the whole long afternoon. Andrew heard their conversation clearly. Melissa's many sweet references to Buddy as Daddy confirmed his suspicion that she did indeed have a serious father complex. This realization makes the whole scene seem even more twisted. God, I can't wait to get into you, baby. Buddy's voice came thickly. It feels like a year has passed when it's only been a week. Well, me too, Melissa responded with eagerness. Andrew peeked in again and saw Buddy kneeling between Melissa's spread legs, ready to enter her. As he saw Buddy push forward, he heard Melissa let out a scream he had never heard before. They began to rhythmically move, accompanied by vulgar curses and slurred moans. Andrew has seen enough. He touched the finger tiger lightly to make sure it was securely on his finger, then walked silently to the bed. Melissa caught his movement at the last minute, and panic flashed in her eyes. In that very moment, Andrew pushed with all his strength into Buddy's ribs, toppling him over Melissa. "Get off my wife!" His roar echoed through the room like an enraged lion finally showing its fangs. Buddy looked at the scene before him in shock. Obviously, this is Melissa's husband, But Andrew doesn't look tall to him. He immediately resumed his usual bully nature and began to get down from the other side of the bed, ready to deal with the uninvited guest. Andrew took a few steps back, which Buddy mistook for a sign of weakness. At this point, Melissa was on her knees on the bed, clutching the sheets and screaming hysterically, "Get out! Don't hurt him!" No one knew which man she was referring to. Andrew took a step back, seemingly showing weakness, but actually building up his strength. Just as Buddy approached with a contemptuous grin, Andrew lunged forward and hit Buddy hard in the stomach with a knucklehead-wearing fist. The blow contained 10 years of humiliation and anger, precise and vicious. They fell to the ground together, Andrew's entire body on top of Buddy. When one cannot breathe, all other considerations become irrelevant. Buddy desperately pushed and shoved, trying to push Andrew, who was pressed against his chest, away, but each struggle caused him more pain. He made a sort of high-pitched whimpering noise, unable to draw in air like a broken bellows. Panic began to spread in his eyes, replacing the previous arrogance. Andrew straddled his opponent and watched coldly as Buddy's hands groped futilely on the slick floor, trying to find a spot where he could breathe. He was no longer the meek husband. At the moment, he was more like a cold enforcer, ready to liquidate all the betrayals. Andrew then raises his right hand and slams the finger tiger as hard as he can into the center of Buddy's face. The sound of cracking bones echoed through the room as blood poured from Buddy's ruined face. Buddy's attempts to breathe became more difficult as the warm blood was flowing steadily into his mouth and throat. Convinced that Buddy was completely incapacitated, Andrew stood up calmly and walked toward the door. He had been deliberately ignoring Melissa's screams, but now he finally heard what she was saying. "Are you crazy? What are you doing? Come back and help him." Melissa's voice was filled with fear and desperation. Melissa's expression quickly shifted from anger to panic as Andrew turned to face her. At the moment, she was naked and uncovered, like a vulnerable prey. Her tone immediately took a dramatic turn. "Oh, Andrew, honey, I know it looks bad, but he forced himself on me. He's a bully. He threatened to hurt me and said he'd kill you to get me. I had to do it, and I didn't want it." Her words were full of false pleading. Andrew slowly approached the bed, not a single expression on his face, as if he was wearing an icy mask. "Shut up, you lying bitch. I know you've been fucking him for months." His voice was low and dangerous, like a volcano about to erupt. Andrew turns to Buddy, who was still gasping for breath on the floor. He didn't want to let this scumbag die like that. That would be too cheap. So he was rolled into a side position so that blood could flow out. From the top drawer of the closet, he pulled out 5 pairs of handcuffs, props he had prepared long ago. He used 4 pairs to cuff Buddy's hands and feet to the bed frame with alarming skill. Returning to his naked wife, Andrew unmercifully pulls her legs and drags her off the bed. He took her arms and cuffed them behind her back with a cold precision in his movements. Then he grabbed her by the shoulders and roughly pushed her into the bathroom and sat her on the toilet. Melissa's once proud beauty is now gone, and she looks woefully out of shape, like a dismantled lyre. "It's time to come clean," Andrew said coldly, an undeniable command in his voice. "I want to hear the whole truth. How you met him, why you slept with him, and why you thought it would be okay with me. I also want to know how many other people you've slept with behind my back in the last 10 years. We have all the time in the world, and you don't need to worry about sleeping with this asshole anymore anyway." Melissa shuddered, realizing her carefully constructed world was falling apart. She began to weigh the few options she had left, thinking about how to answer to minimize her guilt. She bowed her head as tears began to well up in her eyes, but this time they no longer held the same magic they had in the past. "Andrew, I never thought things would turn out like this," she whispered, a tremor in her voice, trying to summon her husband's sympathy. "He's a man of that size, very aggressive. At the party at Holden's he lured me upstairs, and I didn't know he would." "At which party?" Andrew interrupted her coldly, sarcasm in his voice. He'd long since seen through this trick she was used to. Melissa hesitated, calculating quickly how much Andrew might know. "It was at the New Year's party. Susan must have told you, right?" She tried carefully. Andrew let out a sneer. "Liar. It was at the Halloween party." By the time New Year's rolls around, you've cheated over 20 times. His voice was like a sharp scalpel, cutting through her lies with precision. Who told me? You'd be surprised, my dear. Maybe it was your best friend who tipped you off, or maybe it was your lover who flaunted it around. But none of that matters. What matters is that Susan told me everything. Melissa's face instantly turned pale. Susan? But how did she? Her voice was filled with disbelief. Oh, you mean her new lover Rod? Sneered Andrew. Yes, we made up that story to put words in your mouth. Susan recorded your entire conversation. Now, I have several copies of the DVD in my possession, ready to be mailed to anyone you can imagine. Let's see, your dad, your mom, and your obnoxious brother. What would they think about this? Melissa flinched as if she'd been slapped in the face. She finally realized that she had been completely exposed. Andrew continued relentlessly. Actually, it wasn't Susan who initially told me what happened. Susan didn't know the details and thought that New Year's Day was your first and last time. Then you graciously dumped your entire fling history in that video. As for who initially reminded me, honey, do you remember that phone call in the foyer last Saturday? You said something about how much you liked his big guy. That's right, baby. You sold yourself out. You told me everything about your betrayal yourself. Melissa sat paralyzed on the toilet as tears began to stream down her cheeks. She realized she had no way out, and all her lies fell apart at that moment. The image of the perfect wife that she had so carefully woven over the past 10 years was completely shattered in this moment. Andrew took a deep breath and forced himself to remain calm. He knew full well that the next action would determine the fate of their marriage and change the course of their lives forever. Melissa, he said calmly, a note of finality in his voice, I don't need any more explanations at this point. Your lies and betrayal have spoken for themselves. Next, you will receive legal documents from my attorney. As for the disposition of the two of you, I have already made arrangements. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. Anita, you can come in now, he said briefly, then hung up. The whole process was cool and collected, as if executing a script that had been planned long ago. Who's Anita? Melissa asked, confused, a hint of panic in her voice. She felt like she was being caught in a carefully woven web. Andrew slowly explained, Anita is Buddy White's wife. I contacted her after I found out about you guys. I felt she had a right to know what her husband was doing. His words were like a sharp sword, piercing Melissa's last line of defense. A few seconds later, a petite but imposing lady walked into the room. Her eyes were filled with determination and anger, like a lioness ready for revenge. Anita approached Melissa with mixed emotions shining in her eyes. You know what? Her voice trembled. I used to be jealous of you. I thought you had the perfect husband and I was married to a man who constantly betrayed me. Andrew continued, a calculated calmness in his voice. We need to think carefully about what we're going to arrange next. Anita, you mentioned earlier that you had a prenuptial agreement that was unfavorable to Buddy? Anita nodded her head in confirmation. Yes, and if there is solid evidence of cheating, he will have nothing. There was a hint of vengeful pleasure in her voice. So, Andrew said, like a calm negotiator, here's what we can do. We'll take Buddy to the hospital and say that something heavy from the garage hit him in the face. As long as he goes along with that story, he might even get some compensation. Otherwise, you can start your prenup. Turning to Melissa, Andrew continued, a chilling calmness in his voice. As for you, Melissa, I think you care most about what your father thinks. If this divorce gets ugly, he might remove you like he did your sister. You know how much he cares about his reputation. The loss of your inheritance, combined with the little you'll get after our divorce, I'm afraid it won't be nearly enough to maintain your current lifestyle. Andrew's tone became more serious, each word like a nail into Melissa's heart. And, don't forget that I have some interesting video evidence on hand. I don't mind letting more people see it if necessary. That should make you think twice. Finally, Andrew said in an almost compassionate tone, Now, Melissa, you can get dressed and drive away. Find a place to gather your thoughts. Keep in mind, though, that your credit and bank cards are frozen. The cash in your wallet may be good for a few more days. After saying that, Andrew pulled a coin out of his pocket and added sarcastically, Here, add this. Consider it a memento of our good 10 years. The gesture carried a graceful cruelty, the ultimate response to all her arrogance and contempt. As Melissa silently dressed and prepared to leave, Andrew felt a wave of mixed emotions rush over him. Relief, anger, sadness, all the feelings intertwined like a nightmare that had finally ended. He knew that from this day on, his life would change forever. Despite the challenging road ahead, he is finally free of a marriage filled with lies and betrayal. Andrew sighed softly as he watched Melissa walk out of the house for the last time. In that moment, he felt a twinge of melancholy for the time he had shared, but more than that, he was looking forward to a new life. He turned to Anita with determination in his eyes. "It's up to you next. Let's end this nightmare together." Anita nodded with a determined gleam in her eyes. "Yes, it's time to end this." In that moment, the two betrayed souls came to some sort of understanding, and they both knew that this was not just an end, but also a new beginning. The gears of fate begin to turn, and each person moves towards their own end. Anita paid for Buddy's basic facial repairs, but she refused to pay for any further cosmetic surgery. The decision carried a graceful cruelty to make the disfigured face a permanent reminder of his betrayal. After she gives Buddy a little more money than the prenup requires, she cuts off her relationship with him completely. The money was like a graceful slap in the face, a reminder of everything he had once owned but had destroyed with his own hands. Buddy finds it hard to attract women anymore. That once handsome face was now a testament to his debauched life. Over the next few months, he drifted into a deep depression and eventually faded into obscurity like a wisp of smoke. His disappearance serves as a warning that betrayal will eventually be duly punished. Melissa accepted Andrew's offer of settlement. The scenario was considered reasonable, but far from adequate for her, who was used to a life of extravagance. She eventually had to bow down to her sister, whom she once despised, and plead for help to move in with her. This almost ironic arrangement forced her to confront her once contemptuous lifestyle on a daily basis. She was still trying to understand how she had miscalculated it all. Every time she stumbled across a nature documentary about predators and prey, she felt a pang of discomfort. Those images always reminded her of how she'd gone from a smug predator to pathetic prey in the blink of an eye. Sometimes she would wake up late at night dreaming about that confrontation with Buddy and Andrew, and wake up in a cold sweat. In certain moments of silence, Melissa really misses Andrew. Not because of love, but because of the loss of the obedient puppy who was at her mercy. She missed the sense of control, the freedom to do whatever she wanted. But all this is beyond redemption. And Andrew, he doesn't miss her at all. The marriage had been a long nightmare for him, and he was finally awake. The once meek, forbearing Andrew is gone, replaced by a stronger, more sober man. He knows that sometimes the greatest courage is not to forgive, but to say enough. Life goes on, but everyone moves forward with the scars left by this experience. This story teaches us that betrayal is never a game, but a double-edged sword that will eventually hurt the bearer himself. The moment the truth comes out, all false masks will shatter, leaving only the naked reality. For Andrew, it's not just an end, it's a new beginning. He finally realized that sometimes loss is another form of gain. The coin left for Melissa is not only a farewell to the past, but also a declaration of the future. He has finally regained his freedom and won back his dignity. The greatest victor in this seemingly brutal revenge is, in fact, the truth itself. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.